I'm not the only one. Particularly, I'm not the only alumni that questions this organization, and I'm not evil because I raise thoughtful questions around the impact and the way that Teach for America operates.
Welcome to the third episode of Truth for America. Today we have several Teach for America core member alums that are joining us to talk about the recent Teach for America 25th anniversary event that took place in Washington, D.C. So I'm Julian Vasquez Heilig. I'm a professor of educational policy and leadership at California State University. I also serve as the education chair for the California NAACP. And I'll go ahead now and let the other folks on the podcast introduce themselves.
Hi, everybody. My name is Leah Owens. I am a Newark, New Jersey 2004 TFA alum. I've taught beyond my 2-year commitment, but now I work as a community organizer in Newark, improving early childhood education and access to affordable childcare.
This is Gary Rubenstein, Houston, 1991 core member, and I am still teaching high school math at Stuyvesant High School in New York City.
If you haven't seen the piece in the Washington Post, Gary's also known as the stinkweed. Please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. My name is Amber Kim. I am a 2001 core member from Atlanta. But now I'm a professor, adjunct professor of education, and also work charter schools around equity-driven education and really redefining what equity looks like. And I was the one that facilitated the critics brunch at the TFA 25.
I'm Jameson Brewer. I'm a PhD candidate and the O'Leary Fellow at the University of Illinois, where I teach pre-service teachers. I was a 2010 Metro Atlanta core member.
Thank you so much. I'm just so honored and glad to have so many important, critical educators joining us today on Truth for America. So the first thing I wanted to start with was really one of the interesting social media conversations that was happening on Twitter. It was hashtag TFA 25 fact check. So could you all talk a little bit about the origination of that and then just how you saw that evolve through the weekend?
I'll jump in on that. So I created the hashtag and also a Twitter handle at TFA 25 fact check. They already had, hashtag TFA 25 and they didn't have the Twitter handle for it, but I made both of those things. And the idea was, throughout the event, people would listen in on sessions, and if they heard something kind of outrageous, like was said a lot during the 20-year thing 5 years before, the idea that they would tweet it out, and then people around the country could analyze it and respond. That was the idea of it. Now, I created a handle also, and for $10, but my whole operating budget was $30 for the conference. So for $10, I bought a little subscription to a thing that auto-retweets for me. So I registered these guys for it also, so they could tweet, and it would get tweeted out through that handle. And it was very successful. There were a lot of there ended up being, I think, 250 followers on the handle, but on the hashtag there were hundreds and hundreds of different people tweeting to it, responding to it. I think it was a big success.
Oh, fantastic. Does anybody else want to talk about their experiences with the hashtag during the weekend?
This is Leah. I thought it was a really great idea that Gary came up with, and once the conference got started, and I wasn't paying too much attention during my sessions, but when I got finished and I tweeted something out, and to see what everyone else had tweeted out, based based on their session was really, it was almost like I was in their session also. So I found that really helpful to really see what was going on across the entire conference.
Oh, excellent. Thank you. And Amber?
Yes, I was just going to say that it served as a way to not feel alone. I knew a lot of core members or myself that were kind of critically minded going to this event and feeling like they were going into the belly of the beast. And there was a lot of anxiety around that. And so I think having that hashtag and having a place to check in and to tweet to that wasn't just hashtag TFA25 helped unite us so that we didn't feel alone, even if we were alone in a session or alone in our heads because we didn't know who was critical in the room. It just gave that sense of solidarity and like I'm not the only one. Particularly, I'm not the only alumni, which is sometimes how I feel, that questions this organization. And I'm not evil because I raise thoughtful questions around the impact and the way that Teach for America operates. So it just helps feel not alone.
Oh, that's incredible. One of the things that I was talking with Gary before the call, and he had mentioned really the lay of the land in terms of the national coverage in the media of this 25th anniversary event. Teach for America is a $500 million enterprise. They've raised more than $500 million over the last 10 years. And, with the Walton Foundation giving them $50 million for LA and another $50 million for Arkansas, they'll be $1 billion operation very, very soon. So, how would you characterize sort of the national coverage of this 25th anniversary conference?
And this is Gary. I'll jump in because I've been studying that. When I got down to the conference, and actually a reporter had contacted me ahead of time. A reporter who wrote a story about the Core Knowledge website a few weeks earlier, and how they had Core Knowledge had written an article sort of defaming me, let's just say. So I had this relationship with this reporter based on that story, and I said, I'm going to be down at the conference. She said, could I meet with you, and could I maybe shadow you a bit in this conference? So I said, okay. I figured she'd be writing some kind of story, and that would be a part of it. I met with her on Friday, and she came with me. This is sort of before the real conference started on Saturday, but there were a couple of events going on Friday. So she met me about noon, hung out with me for a couple of hours, and then by 4 o'clock, there was this pretty big story, had my picture and everything, that was called Think Read at the TSA Garden Party. But it was meant in a complimentary way, and it was an article about how I'm a critic. And I think they just wanted to put a face to the critics, rather than just saying there's a bunch of critics there. So that was one article. And then the next day, there was another article in the Washington Post. It seemed that maybe PFA had asked for another article, and this was by Emma Brown. And it was also somewhat critical of Teach for America, and it even had a quote where Cammie Anderson, former superintendent from Newark, had said something about how the reformers somewhat contributed to the school-to-prison pipeline, sort of negligence. That got picked up then by Valerie Strauss. And these are the only 3 articles that I'm really aware of. There was no Time magazine, there was no Newsweek, no one was really covering it. There was these 3 articles, and Alexander Russo just wrote an article about this, about why there were only 3 articles about this. So all in all, the articles were either negative or neutral to negative.
Well, I want to ask your guys' thinking on this. I've been studying Teach for America as an academic and as a researcher since 2005, and I'm a data guy. I'm just going to be honest with you. I'm not the person who knows everything about Teach for America, but I look at the data. I've looked at probably every peer-reviewed study that's been written about Teach for America, and so over the years I've had conversations with media about Teach for America, and I would say probably 2007, 2008. I would typically get a call from a reporter. They've already written the article, and they want some really short sentence about Teach for America that is contrary to this very positive Peace Corps type article that's already written. But I feel like, as I look through the media and I, comb through the different articles, like there was a nonprofit quarterly, I think it was, article recently about Teach for America this last week too. And I feel like the media has had a much more critical lens, the Harvard Crimson and other places on Teach for America. Is that something, Amber and, other folks on the call, have you noticed this too?
I don't know if I've noticed that being more critical, because I'm still in the very pro-charter, immersed in a pro-charter, pro-TFA world. So I don't zoom out that big, because in my community I'm still seeing a lot of pro-Teach for America, pro-charter rhetoric in Colorado, in Denver, where they have a heavy impact. So I might not be the one to talk about that.
Oh, that's an excellent point, is that locally you feel like the media coverage is still really positive. How about some other folks?
Yeah, I think that, certainly in the last couple of years, we've really seen a growing tide of critique and criticism of Teach for America, and it's really always been there, right? Of course, for the first 2 decades, there were academic critiques, and those are very good, but they were, in some ways hidden within academic journals, and I think that really in the last 2 years, core members and alumni who were disenchanted with the organization are finding platforms to speak out. And I think that because of the power that positive core member stories have for Teach for America to do its fundraising and recruiting, I think the fact that alumni speaking out that are critics of the organization, I think it's doing damage. And I think that we see that playing out with the recruitment numbers that are down, and certainly within the media outlets that at least in my view, or in my estimation, in the last couple of years, most of the news stories that I've seen about Teach for America have had a little bit more of a critical angle, right? And I agree that not all of them have certainly done that, but, Julian, to your point, I think that, almost 10 years ago, it might have been one sentence that kind of showed a critical view. I think that, in my estimation, the majority now are giving a little bit more attention to it, and that's good. It's goodness that it shows that the critique is working and that people are not buying into Teach for America's narrative blindly anymore.
I think the number that I saw was Teach for America is down 25%. I think I might have seen that in the Washington Post, which I think is a really interesting situation, because Teach for America, their core has grown dramatically. The Obama administration gave them $50 million to grow their core a few years ago in the I3 competition. You saw the Department of Education spend another $12 million or so, maybe it was $10 million, to produce the Mathematica study of Teach for America, which basically showed very, very, very small, in the hundreds of a standard deviation of impact. So I think that, really this democratic conversation about Teach for America has become, a debate nationally that I think the media is finally engaging in maybe a more critical way. So what were some of your general impressions about the event? One of the tweets that really stuck out to me from Jameson Brewer was the bands, the wristbands that lit up when you were supposed to clap. I mean, it brought to me sort of memories of core members from Louisiana telling me that they would have headsets telling them how to discipline kids on the fly when they were in the classroom teaching. Tell me a little bit about some of your other impressions, maybe talk a little bit about those wristbands. What were some of your sort of general impressions overall? You talked a little bit about feeling somewhat isolated, Amber. What were some of your other thoughts?
Well, my thoughts around my general impressions was just that everyone was there. Everyone that was there was, including the plane ride there. I mean, it started from the moment you arrived at the airport, and I was there and surrounded by people in their charter swag. So there was a ton of people in matching, hoodies and matching bags with their matching vests and their seriously. And I felt like at that moment that I was going into this place and I had to put kind of a protective armor on because I felt like an outsider. So even showing up at the airport and then getting closer and closer because we had to switch planes, more people like that, more groups. And I saw a really strong, undeniable connection between no excuses charters, and then all going to this event in D.C. So for me, that was salient for me, and just this idea of then watching some of the tweets that came out of that, and just watching some of the rhetoric, which was where I'm so proud to be a part of this. Like I'm crying. This is such a especially at the big event. Tears were flowing. People were so proud, and it just felt very strange. And like I'm zooming out, and I'm watching these groups and this group think happening, and that was a little scary, maybe, and definitely unsettling for me.
Unsettling. Okay.
Leah, how about some of your impressions from the event?
Well, I have been disconnected from TFA for some years now, both because of choice and also of essentially being pushed away. So when I first made the decision last fall to attend, like I had a very clear purpose, and that was to come and speak my truth and to challenge as many of the ideas as I possibly could. And I felt that I was very effective with that. And then, when I saw, I think it was Diane Ravitch who had, forwarded out in one of her emails what Gary was doing and trying to connect with people, and I connected with him on Twitter. And that just made me more excited about the idea of being there with the group, kind of like Amber was saying earlier, so not feeling alone, because I often also feel alone in spaces like that. 2 out of the 4 sessions between Friday and Saturday, I spoke, went up to the mic, and I was the first one. And in both of those instances, at least 2 people, whether it was right away or later on during the conference when they ran into me, which is crazy because there was just so many people in the convention center, but just said, really great question. I hadn't thought about it like that. So for me, it was mission accomplished. And then it was just, it was like the icing and cherry on top to be able to be a part of the brunch and lead us towards the end about thinking about what sort of actions we want to be able to take as a result of us all coming together in that space and talking about, what is this critical vision we have with TFA.
And Jameson, what were your impressions?
The first thing that I did once I registered is I went to the exhibit hall. I got there on Friday, and most of the sessions were closed, and so that's how I spent most of my time. For me, it was striking that Teach for America is supposed to be a nonpartisan organization, and according to the rhetoric, and I guess technically they can't take sides or issues on political. Any type of political issue, but at least 2/3 of all of the booths at the exhibit hall were charter schools, and some of the charter schools. I mean, of course they're there and they're sharing their information, but some of the charter schools were actually recruiting, and I think Amber saw this happen. They're recruiting people during the event, trying to get them to come work for the charter. In fact, I spoke with a friend who will remain unnamed, who worked for one of the booths there, who said that she saw one of the KIPP charter schools trying to poach teachers from a competing KIPP charter school. And so it's kind of a very odd and interesting sort of place. And again, this is a nonpartisan organization. Teach for America is, and anybody who would walk through the exhibit halls it would be very difficult to leave and with the conclusion that it wasn't partisan-based. I mean, Leadership for Educational Equity, which is Teach for America's spinoff arm that gets alumni into elected positions, they had a multi-booth area that was probably the size of 5 or 6 other booths, and they were taking free headshots of anybody who wanted them. If they gave their information, they were interested in running for political office, and so the exhibit hall was very intentional, and the message that I took away from it was education in the United States is failing, but we're fixing it with charter schools, and the best way to do your part in fixing educational ailments is to either join and work for a charter school or join Lee and become an elected official so that you can help expand charter schools and Teach for America. I think that was the most salient impression that I had from the very beginning.
So,
Amber, here. And one of the things, it's not just charter in public school. There's a very specific kind of charter school. It's very specific around this compliance-driven, work hard, work long, be silent. There were not progressive designs in terms of those charter schools. There were not student-centered designs, and none that I saw. So the ones that I was seeing were very, compliance-driven, making kids really work harder to get out of poverty. Yet the message, many of the sessions or people were speaking, and I wouldn't say these were TFA staff, I'd say these were the people who were presenting, were sending a message of, this is not working. We have to address structural issues, systemic issues, poverty itself, and not make kids work harder and work longer and be compliant. So there was that juxtaposition of Teach for America was tweeting out and was highlighting anyone that was saying something about systemic change needed or combating poverty and combating like these bigger structural issues. Yet the implicit message in that room was that you should join the charter school, which doesn't address systemic poverty, which doesn't look at structural racism. It just makes kids comply, be silent, work hard, and work long to end the achievement gap. So it was just that strange double messaging there that was not consistent, which was very salient for me.
Well, we started this sort of train of thought with the wristbands for applause. And so you're talking about compliance. Maybe that wristband is a perfect metaphor for a culture of compliance.
Yes.
And I tweeted out a picture of teleprompters, in the main event, and I don't want to knock anybody for using a speech, but it struck me as odd. You often hear that TFA supporters will say, well, there's something to be said about the excitement that TFA core members bring to the classroom, but then you talk about these automated bracelets that tell people when to be excited. And so it's a very controlled level of excitement. The speeches were controlled, the teleprompters, everything was so scripted and standardized. But, hey, let's be honest. I mean, that is Teach for America's approach to how they train teachers and how they work with students. So in some ways it was surprising to see, but, to be honest, in other ways I wasn't surprised at all to see those types of approaches to the event being done by TFA.
So, what's interesting is that I think I've been retweeted by Gary, and of course Jameson and I have worked together on a variety of projects, including this podcast, and maybe I've had a little bit of interaction. Did you guys, with Amber, but did you all know each other before you went to this event? And then let me ask a second question. A lot of times on my blog, when Teach for America alums or current core members want to talk about what's going on in their charter school, they want to be anonymous. They're really scared of Teach for America. So could you talk a little bit first? Did you all know each other before you started to coalesce at the Critics Brunch? Why are alums so scared to come out on the record for Teach for America? And then maybe could you also talk a little bit about how the Critics Brunch, like what was the conversation at that brunch?
Well, I can say that I knew Jameson through email because he had worked on that book, and I had a chapter in counter narrative books. But otherwise, and there's one other person in our little group, which is Brandon, who's not on the call right now, but there were basically 5 of us, right there at the conference. So there were a lot of people throughout the country. I actually had a couple of people who had contacted me that wanted to help out, who were also manning the Twitter account, from one current core member from Chicago who wanted to be anonymous, and another core member or former core member in Los Angeles. So they wanted to be anonymous, those 2 guys, or those 2 people. Let's not give away any information about them. But no, I didn't know these guys. We never met in person, but we met up first. We made our own happy hour on Friday and went out and had a nice time. And then we planned on Saturday to do an impromptu panel discussion. I was under the impression, at least I was, that we couldn't be sure that people would go to the brunch. I'll let these guys talk more about it, but it was very well attended. I think there were about 80 people.
80 people attended the Critics Brunch?
I think so. What do you guys think?
I would say there was between 60 and 80 people at the Critics Brunch.
So 80 people showed up for the critics brunch. That's incredible. Tell me about some of the conversations that were going on.
So this is Amber here, and so I facilitated it to be what I wanted to do was use a framework, so it wasn't me talking about my critique, or just a few people talking about their critiques. I wanted to create a space because my sense was that I felt alone in my critiques and my criticism, and I wanted to create. I knew there were people at the event that would be sitting there thinking, I'm Teach for America. I'm not ready to say I hate them or I'm not Teach for America, but I also have really strong criticism about what they're doing, the way they do it, or the impact, all of that stuff. So I wanted to create, but I also know this thing that you were talking about people feeling anonymous. I'm a first-gen college person. I come from a working class community on the south side of Chicago. Teach for America gave me a lot of privilege and power that I never had. So to speak against them at first, it was to speak against power that I had just gotten, right? So I at first was like anonymous and quiet about it, and I've become more vocal. I think other people know it's scary to speak against a very powerful organization. And you see what happens when that happens. There are people out there that will really disparage you and put you down on Twitter. It's a scary kind of process. So I wanted to create a safe space for people just to talk and hear criticism at a Teach for America event and say that that's okay. That's a normal thing. It's okay to be part of something and to also criticize it and to raise concerns. So I used a framework that Eisner uses, an explicit, hidden, and null, the three curricula that all schools teach. And so that every school or every event or every program or every conference really has three curriculum. They have the advertised explicit curriculum, they have the hidden or the implicit curriculum, and then they have the null curriculum. And if you just put that framework out there and you really take a deep look at the explicit, hidden, and null, the criticisms will surface, right? You will see who is not speaking, what is not being said, what is being implied. And so I thought the framework itself would be a great conversation starter. So that's where the conversation at the Critics Forum started. And so any of you could talk about maybe some of the explicit, hidden, and null that was surfaced if you want.
And what's your website called, Amber? I want folks to be aware of your website. What's your website called?
It's amberkkim.com.
Great.
My full name's Kay, so amberkkim.com.
And you had a really great piece last week about I'm a critic, not a hater. Did you want to say something quickly about that?
I am Teach for America, whether for good or bad. I did it. I am Teach for America. And so I take the space of it doesn't do me good just to hate on it and to just only talk about the costs of the model or the cost of the design. I have to weigh both. I have to acknowledge that there is some intention there. There might be some good stuff that comes out of it, but to really also surface the costs. Right. And some of those are really intentional. Some of them are unintended. Some of them are hidden. Some of them are very overt. But then only when we put all of the costs and all of the benefits on the table can we really make decisions and talk about problem solving it. And so that's my stance is to have a critical consciousness about it. And the critical consciousness is when you put it all on the table, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I think we just put a lot of, as alumni, we are expected to only put the good on the table. And the moment we have a bad or an ugly, we are silenced and minimized. The place was saying, come, I know you're Teach for America, and this is a place for people who are TFA in some capacity to put the good, the bad, and the ugly on the table, and to speak truth. So
you talked about being silenced. Have any of you experienced people trying to silence your critique or your dissent, and how do they do it?
Well, I can tell you that on the bus ride back, I saw a tweet from somebody who works at Education Post who actually attended it, but stood in the back as sort of kind of like a spy a bit. Didn't want to come and sit down and participate in it and say anything. So sort of stood in the back. Well,
oh come on, just tell us who it was, Gary. Who was it?
It was Chris Citizen Stewart.
Oh, he was blocked on my Twitter about 7 months ago.
Okay. So So he tweeted out, I was at the TFA haters brunch, and then he said something about, a bunch of white privileged kids complaining about how poor kids can't learn. Well, I had during the near the end of the conference or of the brunch, I said, we have a pretty good group, and I want to take a picture of the group. So I went to the back of the room, and I had to kind of go into, there were so many people there, 60, 80, whatever it was. So I had to kind of, you have to be far away from the people to get everybody into the shot. So I go to the back, and I take this picture. And when I see this tweet from Stewart, I looked at the picture just to see, and you could see very clearly that there were many different races represented in the brunch. So I tweeted back the picture, right? And then 30 seconds later, I got back a very eerie really thing. I don't know if you guys saw it, but he tweeted back a picture that he took of me taking that picture. Yeah, so it's this real eerie, I'm all by myself, and I'm standing far back to get everybody in the picture, and he took this picture of me taking that picture, and it was kind of it's a little weird. It was an odd thing for him to take a picture of me taking that picture as if you're going to find some opportunity just to use it, here I am, the only person in the frame. I don't know if you guys saw that picture and found that to be ominous.
Mm-hmm. So what other, how about you, Jameson? What have you experienced in terms of people trying to silence your critique?
Yeah, so I think that, the more that you put yourself out there, the more that you provide a critique, you certainly welcome. And this is true of anything, not just Teach for America. Though it seems that Teach for America has some of the more hardcore true believers than almost any other organization. But, you invite yourself for critique, and generally speaking, the pushback that I've always gotten, it tends to be some type of ad hominem attack on me or my person, and generally ignores the substance of the critique or what the peer-reviewed research would suggest, which I've been a part of producing some of that peer-reviewed research. The core knowledge group that came up a couple of months back, it's put together by 5 or 6. It's just a small handful of people who their entire mission is to try to discredit what they call a small handful of critics, and a lot of which are on this phone call right now. But they have $1.5 million at their disposal. And so not only are they spending a lot of money of TFA, and Teach for America has been able to create this illusion of prestige, and anyone who's affiliated with it buys into this narrative and this rhetoric. And so when critique started really becoming more popular, or at least more in the mainstream in the last couple of years, so many TFA alum, at least in my experience and those who I've dealt with, have responded to it viscerally because they see it as a personal attack on them, right? Because they bought into this idea that Teach for America does good work, and therefore it's righteous, and that good intentions and all this excitement and energy is good enough, that being well-intentioned is better than actually being trained to do a very professional job, right? It's telling. It's sort of in a sense of core knowledge is put together, and I've said this to them. The organization that they have now appears that a handful of small critics, as they call us, has raised concerns, critiques, and criticisms of the organization, and their egos are hurt so bad that they have to raise $1.5 million to try to preserve and reserve, this great ideal that they built up in their own heads about the organization and themselves.
What's interesting is, you were named specifically in an Education Post article, the article about TFA haters that Amber responded to, and we brought the author of that specific education post piece on, and we had a vigorous conversation with her in episode 2. But one of the things that you often mention, Jameson, is that the funders of Education Post and the funders of the 74 website and the funders of Teacher America, those are the same folks. Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah, they're the exact same folks, right? Education Post is started by, somebody who was formerly on the staff of Arnie Duncan. And the organization, despite their saying that they want to elevate the conversation about educational policy issues, they are unapologetically pro-charter, unapologetically pro-TFA. But as you mentioned, that it makes sense since they share the exact same donor base as Teacher America does. And so it makes sense that they would run to their defense, and almost always, in fact, I dare to say always, without any sort of substance or evidence other than hearsay or feelings or, my daughter did or will do TFA, so it must be good. That's kind of a problem when we're talking about policy in general, but education policy, particularly in this area where it impacts so many lives, but particularly historically disadvantaged and disenfranchised students of color. It's a problem that there's so much arrogance and hubris and so much funding, and all of these organizations that are speaking the same story, the same narrative, right? They're all funded by the same people. They're telling the party line, and that's frightening, I think.
I often get trolled about, it's that internet slang term on Twitter about Teacher America, and Citizen Stewart and Ned Stanley and some of these other folks. I enjoy engaging in vigorous conversations, but when it turns to ad hominem or they try to silence you, then that's when I have to draw the line. Was that Amber that was going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to talk about being silenced. So when the book came out, the counter-narrative book by Jameson, and my story's in there as well, the Teacher America on the Record site really did minimize this right away and said, don't read this book, and you can read the post that they had, but they basically said that this is not accurate. These are misconceptions, that's the word they used, and not the way we operate. So first of all, they are wrong, and even if they were right, they are no longer the way we operate. And so I wrote a whole piece called Opposite of Equity, TFA Attempts Narrative Control, and I really talked about how in the world, in FemCrit, in any kind of critical pedagogy or critical literature, that to try and silence or marginalize a counter-narrative, that is the opposite of equity work. And for an organization that fundamentally, at its core, says it is working to end inequity, and then when someone who's feeling marginalized says, I'm being hurt by this, here's my narrative, it's a counter-narrative to your dominant narrative, it represents a more complex, nuanced truth, a messier truth, and then they say, nope, you can't have that, that is, just by its nature, the opposite of any equity work. And to me, that's what's really hard in this. And it's just constantly saying, don't you see that this is not how equity work works? You can't do it. You have to allow for criticism. You have to allow for counter-narratives. Dr. Cornel West talks about if you want to hear the truth, you have to let suffering speak. And it's true. You have to let that suffering speak. And then that's what will hold you accountable.
So, Lisa, have you ever felt silenced in the Newark? Are you still in Newark, in the Newark context?
I'm still here in Newark, going on 12 years. I'm originally from upstate New York, but I would say that I am new to the critiquing of TFA game, so I'm learning a lot from my comrades here. But indirectly, the experience I have had is that after my 2-year commitment, I was counting down the days, ready to stop sending in these damn Excel sheets. I was just so ready. As far as I was concerned, I worked for the Newark Public School District, which of course, officially I did. And the PD at the time, suggested to me that I take on this position of English learning team leader. So how it's set up in New Jersey, and maybe the same in other regions, but essentially the core members first and second years had to attend, some workshops, PD, professional development, one Saturday a month. So this would be the position that I would take on for the first and second year high school English teachers. And like I said, I was counting down the days until my 2-year commitment with TFA was finished. But when he recommended that I take that position, I thought on it, and I said, you know what, I am going to take this job because I want to be able to be a voice, a different voice that these first and second year core members here, differing from what they got at Institute, differing from, what they're getting here in Newark with their interaction with the TFA Newark staff. So I took on the position. I did that position for 4 years. So clearly I must have been doing an okay job. And then in my 4th year in this position as English learning team leader was the year that Christie got elected and then, became governor, the top of 2010. And one of the first things that he decided to do was to slash the education budget. And I was, and continue to be an activist in the city. I've been organizing marches and rallies, and I had the opportunity to come up with a workshop, because usually I just work with the high school English teachers, but they wanted to do something a little bit different one month and allow the current core members to go to whichever workshop, that topic that interested them. So I proposed having a workshop about these budget cuts, the budget cuts and the implications for public education. And so the PD I was working with, responded. No, this was, I believe, over the phone, not an email, actually. And she was like, oh, well, Leah, I don't think we should do that because a lot of the core members are anxious about their jobs because, of course, they're non-tenured. So, I'm not sure if that'd be a good idea. Why don't you do something about unit planning? So, to me, I'm like, I've been teaching about unit planning since day one. Like, how many times can you teach about unit planning? Like, it's March. Like, if you ain't got unit planning by now, like, we need to have some sort of other intervention. And the whole point was to be able to come up with some different topic that me, as the learning team leader, was interested in presenting on, and I got shut down. So then where it really came in was, so we finished the school year, and I didn't get any email about the following school year. And we all know at TFA, when they have something planned, they're planning a year in advance. So I wasn't getting emails about the planning for the next school year. So months are going by, I'm busy, I'm doing X, Y, Z. Then it's the summer, it's like July, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I haven't gotten an email about September. What's going on? So I reach out. Actually probably wait a little bit longer. I believe I reached out in August, and I'm like, I wrote an email, hey, so-and-so, I hope your son was great, all that. So what's going on with learning teams? Like, I haven't heard anything. So the response that I got back was, oh, well, we decided to go in a different direction. So, basically, I got fired, or whatever you want to call it. And like I said, I had been doing that position for 4 years. I had no problems. They were always making changes and tweaking things. So for them to all of a sudden, decided they're, quote unquote, going in a different direction, but I wasn't a part of that direction, really told me, a lot about what they thought of my voice and that it wasn't valued at all.
We are at the end of our show, and so I want to give each of you just a moment to respond to the following question. Teacher America is trying to expand. In LA, they're trying to hire more special education teachers. They have tried to approach various districts in California. They want to expand. So what would you say to a superintendent and a school board that is thinking about either expanding Teacher America to teach more special ed kids, or a school district that is thinking about having Teacher America the first time? Could everyone take a shot at that? And that'll be sort of our closing thoughts.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in here first if I can. I would say to the superintendent or the school board, here are a couple thoughts. First of all, Teacher America costs more money up front than non-TFA teacher, because you're having to pay finder's fees for every single year for every single core member. And so you're talking about millions of dollars over a certain amount of time that are leaving the district and going to Teach for America, and that's money that could be used in classrooms and buying supplies and helping students. So that's money that's leaving the district that are often cash-strapped districts, and so that just doesn't make a lot of sense, especially, to the point that you raised earlier, Julian. Even the TFA-funded mathematical reports really don't show that Teach for America, that they're any better, right? And we can have a different conversation about, whether we should put value on test scores or as the entire pinnacle of what education looks like. But with Teach for America placing in special education, I was originally scheduled to teach special education with TFA. I got exactly 2 hours of training in special education before they wanted to put me into a position. Ultimately, I fought that, and I ended up in a position that I actually had a degree and license to teach. It was history. And so I think that when we're talking about putting TFA into special ed positions, I really, to this day, I can't understand how that's not illegal. It's clearly educational malpractice to put somebody with 2 hours of training into a position, a legal position that has legal authority over IEPs and over students. That's incredibly problematic. But here's the other thing. Teach for America, Julian, your point about their expansion, they're a nonprofit. Nonprofits ought to be in the business of putting themselves out of business. And the sheer fact that this past weekend was a celebration about Teach for America's growth and looking forward and about how big that they were going to be in the future and having students who were introducing themselves as, X amount of years in the future core members, that's really challenging, because if TFA was really interested in closing the achievement gap and ending teacher shortages where they do exist, they wouldn't celebrate the opportunity to grow. They would be looking for ways to put themselves out of business, and that's what I would say to the board member or the superintendent.
And this is Leah. I would echo everything that Jameson was just saying, and just to add on to that, TFA should be looking into models of sustainability. How can they actually invest in the individuals that live in those communities? I'm a proponent of grow your own programs. So what that would look like is assisting people who live in those communities to be able to, that TFA serves, to be able to complete the educational requirements so that they can become teachers and other education workers within that public school district, and which would also include the mentoring and learning how to navigate the higher education system, which is a huge issue for people in low-income communities. And it's not that they don't have the intelligence to be able to complete a bachelor's degree and a master's degree, but oftentimes it's just actually knowing the culture of higher education and how to navigate that. So Teach for America can definitely do some good and some equity work if they were to look into solutions such as that.
So instead of bringing in outsiders that may or may not be temporary, and usually may is the rule of the day, thinking about community collaborative partnerships to grow your own teachers that are going to be committed to that community for the long term. Is that essentially what you're saying?
Absolutely, and of course that's going to have effect in the economic realm as well, because now you have these individuals with middle class jobs who are going to be staying there and living there and buying homes and being a part of the community. So it has an effect beyond even the classroom itself, and that's real equity and social justice. Excellent,
thank you. Are you there?
This is Gary. I'll say that I would ask these board members to try to look beyond the maybe glossy flyer they get from Teach for America that explains what sort of training, what the training entails, because they can make it sound good, depending on how they describe it. But the fact is that they have this model now with training. With all the money that they have, they still have this model where with 4 teachers work together to teach a class, and that class often has 10 students in it, and each teacher teaches for, on average, 1 hour a day.
So you're talking about the Summer Institute.
The Summer Institute. So, they can make it sound, we have this collaborative model, and they teach, and they watch, and they this, but, you want to ask a prospective teacher, how many kids were in your class? How many hours, if you add it up, how many hours did you actually have? Not that we had 100 hours, 200 hours of training, just the counting every minute that they were in some sort of workshop or something else. But how much time were you in front of students, and how many students did you teach at one time, and what grade level did you teach, and whether that aligns at all with the grade level that we're about to hire you for? Because Teach for America has not invested enough into improving their training model. You know what happened is that they ran out of money back in 1994, and they made this budget training model, and then they evolved that model, and it's not effective. There's no reason someone who is going to be teaching third grade is going to be training by teaching middle school students. There's no reason. We have all these Teach for America people who are leaving each year, how they can't, and supposedly the principal is so happy with those teachers, how they can't sort of match. You just do something where you could know who you're going to teach, and you could train for that ability level, to that age level. But there's a big difference even between teaching like a second grade class or a fourth grade class when you do, real student teaching, and you get to do, different rounds to different ages. You get to see all those different ages. We Teach for America people maybe teach 10 students, they're in third grade, and then they go and teach middle school. And it's the first time they've ever stood in front of kids that age, and it's the first time they've ever stood in front of that many kids.
I was just going to say that the last word, or the last thought I would have is that in making such a big decision like this about whether to bring on, just immerse yourself in both sides of the story, because the dominant narrative is the dominant narrative. It leaves out a lot of the complexity and the hurt and the stories of pain of core members, of families, of kids. And so before you make such a huge decision, just realize that there's another side, and that side doesn't have as big of a budget as Teach for America or as core knowledge to defend itself. In fact, those of us who are saying we're counter-narratives are not paid to say these things at all. And our voices may be small, maybe silenced, maybe marginalized, but our voices are there. So to really read them and realize that the story of Teach for America and what Teach for America will do in your community is much more complex, much more messy than it says it will be. And there's a lot more consequence there. So to please immerse yourself in the counter-narratives so that you have a fuller picture of the truth about Teach for America.